Hey y'all, I'm Elizabeth Booker Houston, and you're listening to the Devil's Opposing Counsel podcast. And I named it that because I just think the devil has far too many advocates nowadays. I'm going to be talking to you about law and politics. This is my very first episode. I'm very excited. This is SCOTUS and the ABCs. That is abortion, birth control, and conception. We are going to talk about some recent cases that have come down as attacks on reproductive rights, where we might see the court go next, and just what's happening out there in the reproductive rights world. So let's go ahead and jump into it. This all starts with the infamous case, the infamous decision that got leaked and then came down officially in 2022, and that is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. That is the case that overturned Roe versus Wade. Sadly, it came down and just destroyed everything. Let's be real. The Dobbs case was catastrophic for reproductive rights, and it all stems from this clinic in Mississippi called Jackson Women's Health Organization, or known as the Pink House, because it was literally in a pink building. It was the only abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi, and yeah, it was at the center of this case, and it wasn't the only case that was coming up to try to overturn Roe. I want to point that out. The moment, the moment that the Supreme Court swung majority conservative and all of these right-wing anti-abortion advocates, saw their chance to get Roe overturned because of the justices who were in those seats, that's when everyone was trying to bring the next case that would overturn Roe versus Wade. And Jackson Women's Health Organization, that was the lucky one for them. If you want to learn more about this clinic, the work they were doing, kind of get some insight into the people behind the clinic, they are amazing people. They did amazing work. I mean, really, even before Dobbs overturned Roe, Mississippi was just a reproductive rights desert in the middle of the Bible Belt, and Jackson Women's Health Organization was really doing the work. But if you want to see a deeper dive into this clinic and other clinics just kind of throughout the Bible Belt, I encourage everyone to go see No One Asked You. It is a documentary following Liz Winstead, who is co-creator of The Daily Show and the founder of Abortion Access Front, an amazing organization that supports indie abortion clinics. And this documentary followed her organization and their vagical mystery tour as they went across the Bible Belt into these red states to assist these clinics and really give you a view of what was going on. So I really encourage that. But let's go ahead and talk about the Dobbs case, because the line of reasoning in this case was batshit crazy. Just point blank, period. When I read this case, I had to reread it, especially certain sections a few times, to really understand what the hell was going on. And the craziest part of this case, I mean, there's so many crazy parts of the case, but the one that stands out to me the most is the comparison to Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah, you heard that right. If you remember Brown versus Board of Education, that's the Supreme Court case that overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, which said separate but equal and upheld segregation. And then Brown versus Board of Education came through and said, absolutely not. We've got to integrate schools because Black children are entitled to the same equal education as all the white kids are. The Dobbs opinion compares its decision to Brown versus Board of Education because it said that by taking the decision of abortion out of states' hands and not allowing anti-abortion advocates to petition their state legislatures for their opinions about abortion, that was the same as keeping Black school children out of these schools. They said that other people who don't like abortion not getting to make decisions about other people and their abortions is the same as segregation. They really did that. I mean, just bold as hell. And when I read it, I just shook my head. And I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, cuss. It was crazy to read. Because those school children in Brown versus Board of Education didn't get a choice, right? at the time, Black Americans weren't given a choice. It was you're segregated and that's it, and you're not given the same access in society. That is very different from these anti-abortion advocates. Nobody is taking their choice from them. They can choose to get an abortion, or if they don't like abortions, they could choose not to get an abortion, right? I could see and understand the comparison if by some crazy logic these women are forced to get abortions, which we know is not the case. But they have the choice. They have the option. They have the freedom. It wasn't about giving them something that was taken from them. It was about allowing them to then take something away from others. And the way the majority framed that shit, wild. Just bold, audacious as hell. But I've come to expect nothing less from them. I want to point out something. So the right to abortion that was established in Roe versus Wade comes from this general right to privacy. And that's not something that is explicitly stated in the Constitution. And that's what made it so easy for, the asshole justices, Amy Coney Island, Neil Gorsuch, Beer Brett, all of them, right? That's what made it so easy for them to attack that case, because it's not something that is explicitly stated. It is a general right to privacy that is implied from the penumbras of the right to privacy. That's the what's that? The first, third, fourth, fifth, and ninth amendments, and those together are said to give an implied right to privacy in the Constitution. And kind of the father of that whole doctrine of the right to privacy is Justice Louis Brandeis. I don't know if his name is Louis or Louis, but I like to call him Louis because I just feel like it's fun and he seemed like a fun guy. But Justice Brandeis really carved out that right to privacy doctrine. He really, really established that. And it has been something that so many of our rights have relied upon, including this right to abortion. And to see them strike that down so quickly with Roe makes you wonder where they're going to hit at it next. Very concerning. And I bring that up because outside of the majority opinion of Dobbs, we have the concurrences. And if you're not familiar with how Supreme Court cases are set up, you've got the majority opinion. That is where you're holding. The holding is basically the rule of law that's been established. That's where everyone, where the meat of everything is. And then the concurrence just means I agree with what the majority said, but I got some extra shit to say. And naturally, Clarence Thomas had some extra shit to say, and boy, did he say it. He specifically highlighted a few cases that he thought the court should revisit. And two of those were major reproductive rights cases. The first one was Griswold versus Connecticut. That established the right for married couples to possess contraception, because prior to that, states could have just said it's totally illegal and just, criminally punish married people from having birth control. And then the second case that involves reproductive rights that he highlighted in his concurrence was Eisenstadt versus Baird, and that extended that same right to contraception to unmarried couples. And he said, maybe we should look at those too. And that gave us a hint of how insidious this court is and what they're coming for next. And so let's look at what's going on today. Let's go ahead and start with FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, or as I like to call them, the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine. This case is all about Mifepristone, commonly known as the abortion pill. Mifeprex is the brand name drug that was approved by the FDA back in 2000. And this is all about the REMS that the FDA decided for Mifepristone. REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. That is REMS. It's a drug safety program that the FDA has established for certain medications that have some serious side effects, so that they can make sure that the medication is dispensed and handled in such a way that the benefits outweigh the risks. And the REMS that was in place for Mifepristone specifically included, hey, you got to go in person, be monitored by a physician physically in person while taking Mifepristone. But again, the drug was approved back in 2000, and statistically, even with the adverse events reported, we have seen that Mifepristone is safer than Tylenol. It is safer than Tylenol when we allow people with uteruses to make their own decisions about taking it on their own. And so in 2020, when COVID-19 hit And the pandemic hit. The FDA and a bunch of agencies were talking about how we need to adjust, right? And make certain things more accessible to folks. One of those things was abortion, mifepristone, which, by the way, is not just used for elective abortions, but also for things like incomplete miscarriages, right? And they said, you know what? We think that based on the over 20 years of data, strong data, that it is safe enough to dispense this medication for folks to take it home without having to go into a clinic, especially because clinic access was so limited because of COVID, right? Like things were, it had gone to shit. So they said, hey, this was one more burden that we can alleviate. And what do you know? After they adjusted that REMS temporarily, we did not see a crazy uptick in adverse events. And the FDA said, we can make this change permanent. You don't have to go into a clinic and be monitored by a physician to take mifepristone. You can get it dispensed in the mail if a provider finds that that is proper, right? Obviously, there's outlier cases where they might be like, I'm not comfortable prescribing this to you. I think you need to come and be monitored. But for the most part, for the average person, it's totally fine to do that. Send it into their pharmacy, let them take it at home, let them go through the process at home from the comfort of their own homes, and advise them to just go to the emergency room if they're having certain reactions. And it's worked out just fine. The problem is the far right, and not even far right, just these conservative anti-abortion folks, they hate this shit. They don't like the loophole of getting around their laws that they've created to control women's bodies, because one of the issues is that when you have a state like Florida that just had a 6-week heartbeat ban go through where they said you can't get an abortion after 6 weeks, right? Okay, you can totally make that decision within your state. However, if mifepristone is being mailed to people through the U.S. Postal Service, that is a federal service, and the states cannot control that because the federal government has controlled the U.S. Postal Service. So even if you were in Florida, even if you were in a place where abortion is effectively outlawed, you could still get mifepristone sent to you in the mail and have that abortion access. Granted, there are states doing things like trying to criminalize people who get abortions even out of state and states where they're legal and come back home. That's a whole other issue for another day. We can dive into that can of worms later. But right now, as it stands, if you want to get mifepristone mailed to you through the U.S. Postal Service in a state where abortion is outlawed, you can still do that, and that is a workaround. And we are now seeing that the majority of abortions are pharmaceutical abortions using mifepristone as opposed to surgical abortions like a D&C procedure. In comes the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine. Anytime you see any sort of progress, any sort of progressive decision being made in the direction, especially when you're talking about what is viewed as women's rights. I understand that this affects all people with uteruses, but let's be real. This is about controlling women in their minds, right? They are still thinking about women and trying to oppose women's rights. Anytime we see any sort of progress made, these right-wing groups are ready, just squirrely as a motherfucker ready to just jump out and do some sneaky shit. And that is exactly what happened with the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine. They established themselves in Amarillo, Texas. These doctors in this alliance, they don't have any ties to Amarillo, but they established their organization in Amarillo, Texas, solely so they could get jurisdiction in order to bring a lawsuit in that area because they knew that would put them in front of the Fifth Circuit, which is probably the most conservative circuit in the federal courts. I teach food and drug law as an adjunct law professor. Let me tell you, I've told my students multiple times, the Fifth Circuit is the bane of my existence, and I fully mean that. There are a few FDA cases that they brought forward, but the Fifth Circuit in general is just trying to fuck up any sort of progress. Just point blank, period. And this was one of those cases where they brought it forward, and they allowed this case to go forward. And the wild thing is, how the hell do these doctors have standing? That is the big question on everyone's minds. Because in order to have standing, to bring a lawsuit, you have to show that there is some sort of harm to you. But none of these doctors have ever prescribed mifepristone. These doctors are not forced to prescribe mifepristone. You can choose to not provide mifepristone to your patients. You can tell them to go elsewhere. They have that option. But they argued that by simply being medical professionals, that If there were a patient who they saw in the future who happened to take mifepristone and they had to treat them, that would just hurt their moral conscience, their little feelings so much, and that is enough harm. I have many thoughts. um, the main one being that they're so full of shit. They're so full of shit. I want to know how much money they're getting paid, by the way, to bring this lawsuit, because let's be real. That is crazy. And a few of the doctors, I mean, let's just talk about some of the doctors who are behind the lawsuit and exactly, I don't know what their claim to this is. Because again, they're not forced to prescribe the medication and they don't have any experience in providing the medication. So you've got Dr. Christina Francis from Indiana. Once again, these doctors don't have ties to Amarillo, but they went ahead and established this alliance for hypocritical medicine so they could. OBGYN, CEO of an anti-abortion group, has never personally been forced to perform an emergency abortion because of mifepristone, but she told the court that there was a patient who came to the ER unstable in 2022. And a different doctor at the hospital, again, not Dr. Francis, had to perform an emergency abortion. And that doctor felt she was, quote, forced to participate in something that she did not want to be a part of. Now, this gets into a whole different issue regarding EMTALA and whether that requires emergency room physicians to provide abortions. And that is a whole different Supreme Court case that I will cover on this podcast. They will hear oral argument about that one, I believe, on April 24th, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around that time. We'll cover that later. But all that to say, this is crazy. It's nonsense to say that that sort of, I mean, just that hypothetical is enough, that has no connection to you, that is enough for you to say that you've been harmed and you have standing in this case. It should be a slam dunk for FDA that there's no standing. That should be case closed, point blank, period, done. But we have seen the Supreme Court do some really weird things to establish standing, specifically with 303 Creative LLC versus Alanis. That's the case where the woman said she might want to make wedding websites one day, and a gay couple might ask her to make a wedding website, and that she might have to tell them no, and then they might say that she's violating their rights under, I believe it was Colorado state law, and that was enough. They said that was enough for standing. They gave no explanation. There was barely a paragraph explaining how the plaintiff had standing in that case. But so it's not a fail safe here, because we have seen the Supreme Court bend over backwards to establish standing. I will say, however, that the oral argument, the line of questioning, even from the conservative justices to the Hippocratic Alliance, they seemed real skeptical about establishing standing in this case. It was a little too weird. So I think that there is hope that the decision that comes out in June will go ahead and toss the case based on standing. However, that doesn't mean it's going to close the door on this issue altogether, because all the court is going to do is wait for somebody who does have standing to bring it in. And I think they absolutely would overturn the FDA's decision. So let's talk about that a little bit, what this entails. Because what they're saying is that the FDA was wrong in its REMS decision, and that needs to be revoked. This gets into very scary territory, because you've now got judges and lawyers who are getting to make decisions about safe and effective medication. You're allowing these people with no authority on science, pharmaceuticals, medicine, etc., allowing them to control what the experts on those subjects do at the FDA. The FDA is the agency that is tasked with making sure that drugs are safe and effective. Having, like, what's his name? Judge Kaczmarek. I called him Judge Kinky Boots, whatever. He was from the lower court in Texas who went ahead and put this nonsense case through. Yeah. having him be the arbiter of what's a safe and effective medication, that's scary. It's very frightening because it's not just about this drug specifically. This this could potentially open the floodgates to undermining the ability for the FDA to do its job. And we're seeing this attack on science all the way around. All the way around. In this case and other cases, we just saw that the FDA settled a lawsuit brought again thanks to the Fifth Circuit, where doctors challenged the FDA's ability to state publicly that ivermectin is not an appropriate treatment for COVID-19. The FDA went ahead and settled that case with the doctors and agreed to pull their old social media posts that said things like, "You're not a horse, you're not a cow, stop it," which was very tongue-in-cheek sort of way to address the issue. But I mean, the point stands. Ivermectin, it didn't make sense. It wasn't safe for treating COVID. It was ridiculous. But the fact that the Fifth Circuit just pushed that nonsense through to allow these quacks. I mean, let's be real. I don't care that they're doctors and MDs, there's always a few in the bunch, right? They were complete outliers as far as what was considered medically appropriate treatment for COVID-19. And they're pushing this ivermectin, which has been shown time and again to not make any damn sense. And for the Fifth Circuit to push that forward and challenge the FDA's ability to make a statement about whether a drug is safe and effective based on data, based on research, mind you. That's what the FDA is citing to. These doctors were citing to their anecdotal experience in their offices. The FDA was citing to research studies. And the fact that the Fifth Circuit was going to push that through and just undermine the FDA's authority, wild. But that's what we're seeing. It's a much bigger issue when it comes to this Mifepristone case. So, like I said, even if the decision that comes down in June says that Mifepristone, the REMS order stands simply because if they say that the plaintiffs didn't have standing, so they don't really make a decision. They're not going to make a decision about the REMS if the plaintiffs don't have standing. But even if they do, that doesn't close the door on a proper plaintiff who has standing coming through, bringing the case through the court system, and then just completely undermining the FDA's authority. So we'll see how that goes. On a personal note, I was down at the Supreme Court during oral argument on Tuesday, the 26th of March, and I was protesting with Abortion Access Front, with Liz Winstead, with her people, and it was really a great experience. I got up crazy early at like 5 a.m, which is not me, y'all. I am. And I got up, I went down there. I'd been from 7 a.m. to about 1 p.m. We were down there protesting. I chased a pro-lifer who was trying to get in the way of a demonstration from I think it's Aid Access. I don't want to say their name backwards. Aid Access. They help you get abortion pills by mail. So aidaccess.org, just going to go ahead and plug that. They are a nonprofit organization, but they were doing a demonstration. Kind of cool. They had little robots that spit out Mifepristone, and as part of the demonstration, they took the Mifepristone to show like it's totally safe because they weren't pregnant. None of the people who took it were pregnant, so it wasn't really going to do anything to them. To show that it was safer than Tylenol. And there was a pro-lifer who was getting in the way. And as Liz instructed me, I went and played a little game of chase and just kept blocking him with my giant sign. I had a great time with the sign. My sign, and you can see this on my Instagram. I posted it there. Picture me holding the sign. We all had giant signs that were like magazine covers of the different conservative justices. I requested Clarence Thomas, and my magazine picture, if you will, said Rogue instead of Vogue. And it said Clarence Thomas, the strict destructionist, married to the Gensurrectionist, because his wife is named Jenny and she assisted with January 6th behind the scenes. That's a whole crazy another story. I feel like I should do a deep dive episode on the corruption of Clarence Thomas, but anywho. And then it also said, plus he's coming for our birth control, but where will he store it? And it was just great. But that was with Abortion Access Front, Liz's organization. Her people are great. We were just down there to make sure that we made our voices heard and let folks know that we are still supporting a woman's right to choose, and we'll do whatever we can. You can check out their organization at aafront.org and get information if you ever want to volunteer with their organization. Amazing people, and had such a great time. So to kind of wrap up this episode, I want to talk about one more case and talk about where we see this going next, and that is to bring up that whole contraception issue that I mentioned when talking about Clarence Thomas's concurrence in the Dobbs case. I want to talk about LePage versus Center for Reproductive Medicine. You may know it as the Alabama Supreme Court IVF case. This, something else. So this came down, I can't remember the decision. I feel like everything's running together for me. But this decision came down earlier this year. I believe it was in end of February 2024. I think so. And they said that IVF embryos have personhood the same as living, breathing little children outside of the womb, and that clinics can be held liable for the accidental loss of embryos under the wrongful death of a minor law. That extension of personhood to an embryo is scary. I can't stress how scary that is. That is before implantation. That is before a heartbeat. That is before any of those limitations that we've already seen that are so harsh right now. And already so extreme. And this goes to another level. And that's where I bring up this edging toward maybe being able to ban contraceptives. IUDs like Paragard, they have warnings saying that they could potentially interrupt implantation. What I'm getting at is that if this case were to go to the Supreme Court, if a case like this were to go to the Supreme Court and they were to establish this level of personhood, it is nothing. It is not even a full step to get over to saying like, and you know what? We can go ahead and ban things like IUDs because of their potential to interrupt the implantation process, which is the same level of interruption as the destruction of an embryo in a petri dish from IVF. It's the same level of development. And so we're getting away from, we already know that they were not being honest. They were being very disingenuous when they said that this was about protecting children with heartbeats, protecting the unborn and all that. This isn't even anywhere close to a baby. This isn't anywhere close. I mean, at this point, the embryo is in no way living off of the person's body. And it scares me to see where we're getting with this. It scares me to see the lengths that they have gone to control women's bodies. And I don't know where this will where this will go in the end, but whatever happens will come quick, because this has all happened so fast. In the blink of an eye. I think about where things were when I graduated law school in May of 2017 and where we are now, and almost 7 years later. And in a short 7 years, so much of what was taught to me as settled good law, as an unmistakable right, those things that were taught to me in law school a short 7 years ago are gone in the blink of an eye. And so, I hate ending on a negative note, but I just really want to stress the seriousness of all of this. I really do. Um, I don't think that I'm someone who leans into just hysterics. I tend to, even though I come off very cynical on a lot of my videos and explanations, I do lean toward hope. But this is a tense, scary moment, and I don't know how we prevent this other than changing the Supreme Court, because what the founding fathers, what these old white dudes, as I say, the old white dudes in kitten heels and bad lace fronts, what they put in place, um, a couple hundred years ago, where are we at now? A few hundred years ago, they did not put enough safeguards in the Constitution, and the Constitution as it's written does not serve us. Our systems as they are designed don't serve us as they should. And this is a prime example of that, because we are getting to a point of no return. And I'm not entirely sure how to stop it. But what I can tell you is I will continue to give whatever information, legal breakdowns, political breakdowns that I have. If I have a call to action, I will absolutely share it, because I hate just giving information with nothing to do. So my call to action to you is to go to organizations like, go check out aidaccess.org. Go check that out. Go check out, AA Front's website, Abortion Access Front, at aafront.org. Find ways that you can volunteer. Find resources that can help you to make sure that you are accessing your full reproductive rights. Share it. If you are in a state like I'm in a blue state, look out for your friends in the red states. Look out for your friends in the states that are pushing these heavy abortion restrictions. And remember to push hard for your state elections, because we are seeing right now in Florida, and I will cover this more fully on a future episode, we are seeing that they are putting a ballot initiative. They are putting one out there where the voters of Florida will get to decide whether to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution, regardless of Governor DeSantis signing that bill to ban abortions after 6 weeks. We can change our state constitutions, and we should, because that is going to be the thing that I think saves us at the end of the day. So push hard for your local and state elections to so many seats at the local and state level. Go completely just unopposed. And if you have the means and ability to run for office, I encourage you to do so, to get those progressive ideas in there. But in the meantime, I will be happy to bring what information I can, whatever breakdowns I can, and all my little opinions. You can also remember to follow me on Instagram and TikTok under the handle Booker Squared. If you want to support this podcast as well as just the work I do in general, you can go to my Patreon, and you can become a patron. You can either be at the $5 level, which is just general support. At the $10 level is where I am trying to provide a consistent monthly newsletter. And you'll also get a special little podcast, like a mini-sode, that is just for my patrons to listen to, or at the $10 level. But you can support me there. You can go to patreon.com/Booker Squared. So the same as my handle on Instagram and TikTok. But I want to thank you all for listening. This has been the Devil's Opposing Counsel, and I will catch up with you next time.